Good morning, everyone. So welcome to the second day of Planetiers World Gathering. Today we start with the forum about the future of the cities. So this is the first panel of this day morning about this city future. And in this room, I think that this is the Generation 2 room, so I think that all of you are in the right room. So I hope that you enjoy all morning. And I should say first that I'm not the moderator that was supposed to be here today, Catarina. So I'm Jorge, and I'm a last-minute moderator. So I will start to ask you, apologize for some mistake that I can have during this morning about the presentation of our speakers. So this panel is about current context and about the cities for the future and 100 climate neutral cities program. We have Pedro Mateus das Neves. He is advisor from United Nations. We have also Wynn, the former mayor of Austin in Texas. Susana Fonseca from Zero Portugal. It's an NGO very known here in Portugal. And also Susana is also very known in these topics. And Richard Blume from TNS Sweden. And I should say only 2 or 3 words about the framework of this panel. And I will begin to say that cities have a crucial role play to achieving climate neutrality. Once because they consume 65% of world energy, and also responsible for the 17% of the emissions. Cities also have 75% of all world population in urban areas, and that's why also cities are more vulnerable, also have the capacity and the difference to make the shift to combat climate change. So, as you know, the cities, in the project of the European Union about 100 climate neutral cities program, such as the policy that was developed in the Swedish city program, have to achieve until 2030 the climate neutrality in these role model cities of 100 that was selected. So I will begin to ask, and I will start with Pedro, if this project is to be an inspiration or is to be the trend. How can we, in 8 years, to achieve this climate neutrality?
Let me go back one step. I like to believe that we are today celebrating the 50 years of the first conference on environment from Stockholm, and I believe that the main challenge has been since that time, and then in '87 when we defined what sustainable development is with Brundtland, it has been a way to find the balance between the planet, the people, and prosperity. And if we focus too much on green sustainability, we are not talking about sustainable development. Because we are talking about people. The main challenge is how to humanize cities. And obviously for cities to live and for cities to thrive, they need children. And for cities to have children, they have to have parents. They want to live in these cities. Obviously, a green city is much more attractive than a brown city. But it is vital that we understand that at the end, It's about creating a space for people to live and for people to thrive. The planet perspective, the planet angle should never be isolated. And so it is vital that we speak about net zero, and it's very important that when we speak about net zero, we understand that we're talking about the bath. So the amount of water that comes in is the same amount of water that gets out. And so we are not going to cut CO2 emissions to zero. We want to absorb the same amount of CO2 emissions that we are producing. And this, so otherwise...
A positive
not only
balance.
positive, pragmatic, you know. Otherwise, people are not going to believe us. It's essential that people believe that sustainable development is possible. And sustainable development is possible because we have concrete actions. We have a vision that can be materialized. We have an action plan of projects that can happen and that can make cities greener and that can make cities happier. It is essential that we associate happiness, a smile, with the transformation of cities. And so I believe that, you know, much more than just counting CO2 emissions, let's make sure there is a shift, a mind shift in the way we look at cities, in the way we look at how are we going to make our cities much happier. And within happy, within prosperous, within sustainable for people, this includes being green.
Okay, thank you, Pedro, and I agree completely. In my initial format, I will take for the order to speak, but I have to pass all you two because your intervention put the people in the center of sustainable development, happiness and identity. So I have to move to Richard because I suppose that the Swedish project have to also about this people center in the strategy.
Yes, I think so. In Sweden, there's a national program called Viable Cities, and it's framed as addressing climate neutrality in many aspects. It's part of the connected to the EU program on climate neutral cities. It's been a bit of a pilot in some ways, and what I would say though is that if you look at what the goal of it is, it's about providing a good life for people within the planetary boundaries. So climate is just one aspect of setting goals for cities that are resilient, vibrant, that are attractive, that create jobs. So definitely I agree with the comments here that people need to be at the center of the discussion around cities, and it isn't just about, obviously the energy transition and the getting down to climate neutrality is essential, but we can't just tackle that and forget all the other aspects, especially the people at the center.
Susana, it's possible it's possible or even it's important to have measures of the planetary boundaries of the emissions at city level. How can we put this in the policy level to be more incentive to have a balance in terms between emissions and captation, for example, or even to promote more biodiversity?
Yeah, just to say that I agree to a certain point to your intervention in the sense that actually, for example, us in Zero, we are promoting the idea of well-being economy, and a well-being economy is focused on the idea that an economy should work for people, for their needs, for what they need in their life to thrive, to have a quality of life, but within the planetary boundaries. I mean, the planetary boundaries are important because that's where everything comes, and this is something we can never forget. I mean, the air, the water, the food, everything comes from the environment. The only thing that doesn't need nature, doesn't need the planet, is speculative economy, because it works on a different level. It doesn't need anything, just expectations, etc. But everything else depends on the planet. So, of course, we have to go and try to reach out to people and involve them and create a good environment. That's what we want also. We don't believe in a change in a transition without people, but we do need to add more to the equation than we have so far, this idea of the planetary boundaries, because without these, the respecting of the boundaries, we will have more and more problems, and again, those who suffer the most already, that are already suffering more, will be suffering even more. Because when we have an extreme event in Portugal, or we have an extreme event in Mozambique, the consequences are completely different, and the ability to recover from it are also completely different. So, now going to your question, yes, I think it is important. I mean, of course, all these indicators are usually huge indicators, so it's not easy to measure it, and I think that's not the relevant point, if it's 0.5 more or 0.5 less, but it's to have an idea if a city is really going towards this objective, this goal of respecting the planetary boundaries. Yes, I do believe it might not be simple. We know that all these areas we work are not simple, but I would say that they are very important.
And what do you think when compared, for example, with ESG? Do you think that ESG is not enough? It's only a path. Should improve to be more proximity to the planetary boundaries?
Well, again, I would say I think we sometimes, for example, we see now a trend at the European Union where we are going sometimes too much into detail. Just to give you a small example of how we see cities working towards this well-being economy that we are defending. It's an example from Wales, so it's Europe. Pedro wanted to discuss also the realities beyond Europe, and I think Bill also. Yeah, but the idea was that they had a problem. They had a highway and they had traffic jams regularly, and they wanted to solve the problem. And so they thought, what we do, the traditional solution is build another lane. You know, build another one, and we have 3, and then people can, but then they have, because it's one of the countries that are working really towards a well-being economy, they have a commissioner for future generations that actually challenged the Prime Minister and said, okay, let's see how this contributes to this project that we have, this strategy that we have, that also has these objectives. Not so much it has indicators also, but it has the objectives. And they match it, they compare. If they had that, it was a huge investment for the country, and they thought, okay, so one of the issues we discovered that it's important for people in this well-being economy is health. And if we build another, and obesity, it's apparently a problem that was identified. And so how would this new lane contribute to the health of people? It won't. It probably will increase the problem. How it will contribute for inequality when the poorest people in the region, 25% of them do not own a car, and so another lane would not solve their problem. And also in terms of climate resilience, I mean, how would that contribute to a climate resilient, more climate resilient Wales? It won't. So what they did is they stopped the project and they restructured their public transportation network in order to put people walking more, so people in the center, you see? So people walking more, providing those with more resources to move around, to go to their jobs, for example, or to school or whatever, and also contributing to less emissions. And so this is the vision that we like to see. So more than just this
it's
indicator.
It's about individual behavior and...
Not individual. This is not individual. This is structural. Totally. Okay. I mean, there was this. The idea was they created the infrastructure to allow for people to have better lives. And that's what we need from more than this indicator or that. This I totally agree with Pedro, without being, this having 0.5 more, 0.5 less. I think it's more important to have this vision. How does this contribute to the well-being of people? Because that must be the ultimate objective within the planetary boundaries, of course.
Okay, thank you. So Wynn. Wynn is a visionary mayor from the other side of the seas. So 20 years ago, he develops a well-being economy in his city. How can we have this role model to the cities in terms of urban planning, governance, and to achieve all these targets that we spoke?
Well, thank you, George. Several thoughts. One is, I think it's wholly appropriate that whether it's a UN program or EU, mandates or suggestions, that fundamentally the cities where the interactions occur, where the humanity is, and where the challenges is, where the consumption is, and where the generation is, for one. And so to hear these comments from my colleagues, it just, because whether you're a mayor in, say, the United States, particularly 15 years ago, when, there was, debate, supposedly, about global warming or climate change. So forget, the idea of a federal recognition and federal programs and ultimately federal mandates to sort of help mayors and cities, with different programs. U.S. cities at the time were having to do things related to sustainability and climate protection and adaptation and renewable energies and building codes in a hostile environment of not only no support, no mandates, usually suspicion and perhaps penalties for doing things. But so even when the mayors were attempting to do very progressive sustainability things, a mayor can never lose sight of the poorest in your community, or you can never lose sight of the crime rates, or forget recycling. First, you got to make sure you're dealing with the solid waste and public health dynamics of waste. And so, and potholes and street lights and, the presentation of your parks and children's programs. So I think it's wholly appropriate that now there's this bigger recognition that it's more than just our carbon footprint, it's sort of our humanity measurements. And the good news is now with the mostly global recognition of how interconnected all of these issues are, that you can't have a sustainable economy, or just you can't have a good economy unless you're attracting young talent, and you won't attract young talent unless you have cleaner air, cleaner water, better public transportation, likely a more dense urban core, more multifaceted, multi-use urban core, so people can live, work, and play, and shop, and work out, and worship, all in the same general location, and not have to drive on the overburdened highways. So as a former mayor, it's really encouraging to see that what was the global warming, challenge or set of public policy initiatives from different cities 20 years ago has now matured into such more depth and more, reality for the urban life. But I'm really more encouraged than I've ever been thinking about the fact as the planet has urbanized and now the clear majority of humanity is living in relatively large and dense cities, that's actually the opportunity. And I remember touring favelas outside of Rio de Janeiro and thinking, oh my gosh, this is sort of terrible. But then I was pointed out to me that no, these are people that had traveled hundreds, maybe thousands of kilometers on foot because to them that represented the chance to interact with government services and to have neighbors. And as scary as it looked to me, I began to realize that in fact the favelas sort of exist by desire, by demand, by, people are sort of voting, if you will, with their feet and leaving what would be a terrible situation in a far-flung, very rural, very, lowly populated set of dynamics, particularly if you have a disability or if you have, the challenges that so many people have, but they'll come to the cities. So some people point to cities and see favelas or see slums or see, the poor, and they think that therefore cities, that's the problem. Cities obviously aren't working. Cities are the problem, not the answer. I think it's just the opposite, that you have that dynamic because of humans wanting to better themselves, and it's far easier for us as policymakers to deliver services, to deliver programs, to deliver inspiration and vision, to the people there than in the far-flung, remote areas. So I'm really optimistic that now the cities are the focus of these discussions.
We have to be aware that this is a problem in the future, because the population growth will be focused in the sub-Saharan Africa. So we have these urban settlements without conditions and health conditions, people to grow. But I have only a curiosity question that I think that we can share with all the people that are hearing us. You were mayor in a context that the Kyoto Protocol wasn't signed in the USA.
Correct.
And it wasn't easier to you to have a type of multi-level governance that you could have your back with the, as you said about the federation recognition or national recognition about that, or
right.
Because it's more difficult to act individually as a city, no?
Right. So, correct.
This is a governance question. So.
Yes. So back, 15 years ago, when the Kyoto Protocols, this is the Kyoto Protocols became sort of the global, parameters or recognition of the challenge of climate change and climate protection. U.S. government was divided, and there was going to be no action even accepting or acknowledging that or participating in that. And so I was involved with a group called the U.S. Conference of Mayors, so 2,000 mayors of the major cities of the U.S. We slowly just started agreeing to implement the Kyoto protocols ourselves. And a city like Austin, we were sort of lucky in a sense, because Austin is truly a vertically integrated, self-sustained city in that we generate our own electricity. We have a nuclear power plant. I had a coal plant. I had a bunch of gas plants. We built a bunch of, but we slowly built wind turbines and solar, but we have to generate our own electricity. We have to find our own drinking water. So we have no, there's no real...
50 years ago.
Yeah.
15 years ago.
But 15 years ago. And so in a sense, that made it easier for a city like Austin just to say, fine, we'll just do Kyoto protocols or what becomes the next generation of those suggestions, mandates on our own. And so I ran the utility, the electric generation utility. And so I just declared, okay, every demand for additional kilowatt hours moving forward will never again be met with carbon. And so we, we built wind farms and solar panels. We closed our coal plant on the supply side. Then on the demand side, as an old architect, we changed the building codes. We demanded upgrades in insulation and weatherization, and so it was a good example of cities just doing things on their own because both the state government and the federal government were doing nothing. And it goes back to my argument that cities really are and mayors, really, is where we would say the rubber hits the road, or where the action, both the problems and the solutions, can get get mixed together and try to come up with the solutions. And so I'm really pleased that so much of the Planetiers World Gathering, but really more importantly, just the dialogue that colleagues across the world are having, truly recognize now, just focus on cities and almost have it deliver what becomes the federal, and then the continental, and then the global series of answers.
Pedro, I have a lot of questions to do to you. Besides, you are United Nations advisor, so I'd like also to influence you with a lot of questions. But let me ask you, with these local actions, do you think that could be all putting all together in a pot to contribute for a global common good, how can we manage then the common areas or the hotspots that we have in Earth to compensate all these urban settlements with the global governance or something like that?
I think the key word is transformation, and out of transformation is impact. People get sick of just ideas and ideologies, and people want impact. People want to see the transformation. And one of the key issues of SDGs is the fact that the power shifted from central administration to local administration. This is beautiful to see today in UN. Today we have the Forum of Mayors, and so we have mayors coming from all over the world, sharing what they're doing to improve the quality of life, to reduce the carbon footprint. Carbon footprint is just the liquid dimension. It's just the gas dimension. We have the liquid and we have the solid dimension that are as important as the gas dimension. But anyway,
don't you think that these cities representatives could be a seat in a COP, for example? As a para-diplomacy or something?
I think cities definitely, today it's clear for United Nations that the SDGs will be won or lost in the cities. Yes. It depends on the mayors, and just what happened in the UK today. It's very evident that public policy has a very strong way and influence on how things will happen. And what is very interesting today is that the power that the proactive mayors have to make the change. And I would say that we divide cities in 3 types of cities. Cities that are just growing a lot, like Kinshasa, like Lagos in Nigeria, where we have all these slums. And how are we going to provide dignity for the people in the slums? It's not the slum itself, it's the dignity of people. And so when we're talking about fighting poverty, it's not just about fighting poverty, it's about providing dignity. And it's about creating jobs. Poor people, they are not poor because they want to be poor. They're poor because they're not making money. And so the point is, how are we going to create jobs? And again, cities are essential. And so it's immense, the capacity that mayors have, not to create jobs, but to create the environment for investment to happen in the cities and for those enterprises to create jobs. And at the same time, to say, just as we are doing with building codes, to say that what type of industry are we willing to attract to the cities? And what type of footprint are the industries going to have? And so what is beautiful today...
But shouldn't they be paid by the natural service that they provide to the world, for example, when we are talking about South?
It's very interesting. When you read the last book on Piketty about inequality, the challenge that we have been doing to improve the way we run the fiscal service and the fiscal pool, it has been improving a lot. What happens today is that the quality of life that people demand are not compatible with the fiscal service that the public service is able to recover. And this means that it's, and this is a second transformation that it's obvious and that comes from the SDGs, is that if we are talking about $3.9 trillion per year to achieve the SDGs, and considering that only 1.4 trillion can come from the public sector, it's obvious that the 2.5 will come from the private sector. And this is another change. How are we, and this is much easier for mayors than for prime ministers or presidents, you know, how are we going to look at the city of the future, and how are we going to design the future, the projects, the jobs, with the private sector, sitting along with the private sector at the same table, and asking the private sector to have two things, a people agenda and a planet agenda. And on the other side, cities have to tell the private sector, yes, we understand prosperity is vital for you, profit is vital for enterprises to sit at the table and to come to the city. And this is a huge transformation. Let me just touch on one point that I believe is very important, and is very important here in Portugal. You know, I'm working in Mértola. I'm working in cities that the interior cities, that the demography is decreasing.
Yes.
I'm going to Japan this afternoon.
In rural areas.
In rural, yes, rural, but it depends on how rural can Mértola be considered, you know? So we are talking about small cities, and we are talking about cities that used to have 10,000 inhabitants, and now they have 8,000, and very soon they will have 6,000, 3,000. The biggest problem in Japan is negative demography. I'm going to Japan this afternoon to study negative demography. How are we going to reverse negative demography? The biggest problem in Portugal is probably negative demography. What are we doing to reverse negative demography? I was speaking with the mayor of Mértola the other day, and she was, well, the vice president, and she was telling me, you know, Rosinda Pimenta,
yes.
Incredible woman. And Rosinda was asking me, you know, what can we do? We have all these problems about social housing. And my problem is not social housing. My problem is to have the houses that exist in Mértola and open the houses so that young people can come and live in Mértola. You know, what I mean is the challenges that we have today, they vary on the size, they vary on the prosperity, they vary on the geography, but the key issue is, let's look at the problems that we have and let's use sustainable development to solve the problems. Being green is one of them. Quite frankly, negative demography is another, and I think we all have to join forces, not just to find a vaccine for COVID, not only to find a vaccine for the green, but also to find a vaccine for dignity, for improving life in this type of cities.
Susana, I think that Pedro is, I suppose that is trying to say that we have to change the model, the economy model, since the cities. So how can we create projects that can be invested in these areas that could bring people again, but projects that should be based in natural resources, ecosystems, agriculture, forest, and so on?
Well, I think it depends on the city that we are working on. If we're working in Mértola or if we're working in Kinshasa, or, I mean, it's a different, I mean, we have cities now that have the same population as Portugal, or more. I mean,
right.
It's, they don't have the same space, so I think the challenges are
we
many.
have now 34 megacities, that is more than 10 million inhabitants, but we will have 43 megacities in the final until 2030.
Yeah, and it's completely different to work in the context like that, when you have like a country in a place, because it's basically a country in a place, or you have something like Mértola, where actually there are some projects that are being developed. I mean, for a long time, Mértola has been like a cultural hub in that region. I mean, they live in the very far away region with almost no water. I mean, I think it's the the area in Portugal with the highest scarcity of water, and still they have projects, and they are culturally they are very active, and they try to, but I think it's truly projects that are focused on the reality of the place, because to work in Mertola, even in agriculture, for example, you do need to use different skills than if you work in a different part of the country. Just talking about Portugal, which is a very small country in the world, you need to use different tools in these different areas, because it's different. The soil is different, the conditions are different, and so you need to bring, let's say, or try to develop, and that's something that Mertola actually, it's a good example, because they've been doing it for many years, even cooperating with Spain, for example, with regions that have the same problems, the same challenges. But I would say Mertola is, although with the difficulties they have, they are a good example. They are moving. They didn't stop like in time, waiting for something to happen from abroad. They try to move, they try to do things with the people, with universities, bringing researchers and bringing new people, young people, maybe attracting them. But as Pedro was saying, I mean, it's difficult when Will was saying that in the cities it's easier to provide the services, the schools, the health, or I won't say the culture in Mertola, but it's because when you have big cities, you also have this potential for more efficiency. Right. In terms of the providing the services, everything, we know that. But of course you have the challenges also, because when cities grow, they usually cover the best soils, for example, and then you get to have good sustainable food systems, then you have to really rethink how you can have it, close by, and it's very difficult when you have these big cities. But I think that's the big challenge. Just to say, in every city you must have a local look. It's not like you have a recipe. For example, we work with municipalities to promote zero waste strategies, for them to become zero waste municipalities. And in each municipality, we need to look into what they do and how the population, the structure, what economic activities they have. I mean, how can we, for example, use bio-waste for some industry at the local level? If they have agriculture, can we then just try to have some projects with agriculture, with farmers, and to use that resource in local, like in that place? So I think that's the challenge. It's not like you don't have a recipe. You have to look, and you have to try to create these connections, like with research, with like universities, or even technical schools, and companies, as Pedro was saying. Companies that sometimes are interested, not many yet, unfortunately. But I think, for example, we have a very good example also, but it's with many years of history, which is Campo Maior, with the Delta approach. I mean, that was kind of, these are the entrepreneurs we need. People like 60 years ago, he decided to develop his factory. So Will probably doesn't know, it's a huge brand in Portugal in coffee. Oh, yes. So they import the grain, of course, because we don't produce coffee here.
Portugal is Spain nowadays. So.
Yeah. But it's a Portuguese brand. It's a Portuguese brand,
but it's very known in Portugal.
And it's really that entrepreneur, that person that decided to invest in its hometown, and actually, it's not just to have workers. I mean, he has invested in the community. He has. I mean, many years ago I visited, and they already had like. For schools, for kids, they had like trainings for becoming more, more innovative, to become more, to make entrepreneurs, let's say, people with ideas that go and build things. And I mean, most of the schools. I mean, I live here near Lisbon, and in the school my daughter is, no one is teaching her anything like that. And these are the kind of. I mean, it's not a partnership, it's just a decision by some, and I know some other, for example, Yves Rocher in France did the same thing. He developed all the brand in that place where it was his hometown, and he actually provided, these are the kind of things that we need, and we need to give more, I would say we need to give more space to these ideas and show that it is possible, because in many cases, for example, what we have when we contact with municipalities is, particularly smaller ones, I would say, it's this idea that it's all very difficult.
It's It's really difficult to have deltas in every place.
Yes, we don't want to have so much coffee in the
But I think that Richard, it's also important to give value to nature. No, to have some not only focus in growth, economy, GDP, and so on. How we can, it's better to say Sweden. I think that is already also in the mindset of it's a cultural mindset. I would say also that Susana is saying in some countries this kind of ethics investment and these worries center in the well-being, in human happiness. It's a cultural also.
Yes, I have to say I'm a dual citizen, so I'm originally from Australia, not speaking with a Swedish accent, but it's definitely the case in Sweden. It's, I think it's a cultural attribute to have this close connection to nature. And I mentioned, I mean, we were talking about this in the beginning as well, about this looking at things from a holistic perspective. I think Swedes try to do that. And I think this is where we get to, where we're like, is it an environment, or is it the economy, or is it the social thing? Actually, we need to stop saying that. I think we need to just say it's one thing, and all three of those aspects need to be dealt with holistically. So that means when we're looking at climate solutions, we also have to be thinking about biodiversity. If we're looking at job creation, we need to be looking at decarbonisation. I'll give you some good examples. In northern Sweden, there's a real green industrial revolution underway. Everything from fossil-free steel production with hydrogen using renewable energy, green batteries with Northvolt. And when you have these new technologies and these new industries being developed to literally cut, I mean, one of these projects on its own will cut Sweden's emissions by 10%. So these are big game-changing initiatives, but they're changing all sorts of questions for like, how are we going to attract people to these cities in northern Sweden? There's no housing for them, so we need to build housing. How are we going to make it attractive for their families to come here? So this combination of job creation, decarbonisation, and also the social dimensions. Why are people going to want to live there if there isn't all the infrastructure for a good quality of life? We were talking in the break as well a little bit about the social aspects of sustainability in Sweden is entering an interesting phase now with, we're talking about loneliness, for example, as an issue. That's a social issue that needs to be addressed in Sweden because people have been isolated or feel a sense of isolation. At the same time, Sweden's dealing with a lot of integration issues at the moment. So that's again where if we're going to address any type of issue, we should be looking at the attributes and the context of a place and trying to come up with solutions that address all three aspects of sustainability. I guess you could add more, but try and look at it from a holistic perspective. And that's also, I mean, you know, we have this tendency to create solutions that are essentially just a trade-off. We pick a few SDGs and then we ignore the others because, you know, they're too inconvenient or something. So we need to be looking at the whole, basically, and then looking for co-benefits rather than trade-offs.
Okay, thank you very much. We are running out of time, so I will ask you a round of applause for these inspiration speakers and the examples that we have this morning is food talk. I think I really appreciate and I really thank you for your participation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.